those who are viewing this presentation. Today, we are going to tackle about the biochemical processes of photosynthesis, which are namely called photosynthesis equation, stages of photosynthesis, and light-dependent reaction. So, let's get started. Here is an overview of photosynthesis. It is a multi-step process that requires sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water as substrates. It produces oxygen and glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, simple carbohydrate molecules that are high in energy and can subsequently be converted into glucose, sucrose, or other sugar molecules. These sugar molecules contain covalent bonds that store energy. Organisms break down these molecules to release energy for use in cellular work. In other words, photosynthesis is a process by which plants and other things make food. So, why is it important? It is a source of energy and food for all organisms. It releases oxygen into the environment, which is utilized by organisms. Even us humans and animals depend on it. Without this process, we wouldn't survive. And it doesn't have a balanced ecosystem without having it. Moreover, this is other facts about photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is an endergonic process because it requires an input of energy from the surroundings in order for a chemical change to take place. Second, photosynthesis is a reduction oxidation. Redox reaction, meaning that it involves the transfer of electrons between chemical species and where the energy from the light is used to oxidize water, releasing oxygen gas and hydrogen ions, followed by the transfer of electrons to carbon dioxide, reducing it to organic molecules. Photosynthesis organisms are called autotrophs because they can synthesize chemical fuels such as glucose from carbon dioxide and water by utilizing sunlight as an energy source.
So let's talk about the photosynthesis in the leaves. Plants make food through photosynthesis. Using their leaves, plants combine sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to make glucose and oxygen. A leaf is like a plant's food factory, collecting all of the components into one place so that photosynthesis can happen. Let's start with sunlight. The type of leaf is exposed to the most sunlight, and so the cells specialized for trapping light are on the top of the leaf. These specialized cells are called palisade mesophyll cells. They are packed full of chlorophyll, the green chemical that plants use to absorb light. Most leaves have a large surface area so that they can trap as much sunlight as possible. Moving on to carbon dioxide. This is where the bottom of the leaves comes in. There are little pores on the bottom of the leaf called stomata. The stomata open up so that carbon dioxide can diffuse into the leaf. The stomata are controlled by sausage-shaped guard cells which open up to let carbon dioxide in. The guard cells can also close the stomata to stop other things inside the leaf like water from escaping. The carbon dioxide comes in from the stomata and then makes its way up through the leaf, through the gaps in the spongy mesophyll layer in the bottom part of the leaf and heads up to the palisade cells where photosynthesis occurs. Leaves are thin so that carbon dioxide doesn't have too far to travel. The final reactant needed for photosynthesis is water. Water comes into the plant through the roots, moves up the stem, and enters the leaf through the vascular bundle. The vascular bundle contains a hollow tube specifically for water movement called the xylem. The veins on the leaf are actually the vascular bundle, allowing water to be spread out through the leaf. The leaf's palisade cells now have sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. They are ready to photosynthesis to make a glucose and oxygen. How do leaves manage to let in the wanted things like water and carbon dioxide but prevent unwanted things like bacteria getting in and also prevent the reactants from escaping from being used? At the top and the bottom of the leaf are epidermis cells. These produce a protective waxy cuticle layer. The waxy cuticle seals up the leaves so that the only way in and out are through stomata, which are regulated by the guard cells. In all autotrophic eukaryotes, photosynthesis takes place inside an organelle called a chloroplast. Chloroplast is found predominantly in the cells of plants' leaf bask in sunlight, strategically positioned to harness the energy of the sun. The number of chloroplasts can vary, but within a single plant cell you can find anywhere from a few to several hundred of these mini power stations. For plants, chloroplasts containing cells exist in the mesophyll. Chloroplasts have a double membrane envelope composed of an outer membrane and an inner membrane. Outer membrane regulates the passage of molecules in and out like a gatekeeper, while the inner membrane is a labyrinth of complexity, forming thylakoid sac flattened sacs where the magic happens. These thylakoids have stack in grana, increasing the surface area for sunlight absorption. The stroma, a fluid-filled space, envelopes the thylakoids. It's in the stroma where the second phase of photosynthesis takes place. Embedded in the thylakoid membrane is chlorophyll, a pigment that absorbs certain portions of the visible spectrum and captures light energy in the first step of photosynthesis. The light-dependent reactions creates ATP or adenosine triphosphate and NADPH or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, which are crucial for the next stage within the stroma. The light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle, use ATP, NADPH, and carbon dioxide to craft glucose and other essential compounds. Chloroplasts are adorned with pigments like chlorophyll and carotenoids. Chlorophyll absorbs light while carotenoids provide protection against excessive light and oxidative stress. The significance of chloroplasts extends beyond leaves. They generate oxygen, power the food chain, and help regulate our planet's climate by absorbing carbon dioxide.
Oxygenic photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process by which green plants, algae, and some bacteria convert light energy into chemical energy in the form of glucose. Photosynthesis reaction involves two reactants, carbon dioxide and water. These two reactants yield two products, namely oxygen and glucose. Hence, the photosynthesis reaction is considered to be an endothermic reaction. So, our photosynthesis equation is 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus light energy is converted to C6H12O6 plus 6O2. In words, this equation can be interpreted as follows. 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water are taken in by the plants, plus in the presence of light energy or sunlight, these reactants are converted and produce 1 molecule of glucose, a 6-carbon sugar, and 6 molecules of oxygen. The energy from the sunlight drives the reaction of carbon dioxide and water molecules to produce glucose and oxygen, as seen in the chemical equation for photosynthesis. Though the equation looks simple, it is carried out through many complex steps, involving intermediate reactants and products. During photosynthesis, plants take in carbon dioxide, CO2, and water, H2O, from the air and soil. Within the plant cell, the water is oxidized, meaning it loses electrons, while the carbon dioxide is reduced, meaning it gains electrons. This transforms the water into oxygen and the carbon dioxide into glucose. The plant then releases the oxygen back into the air and stores energy within the glucose molecules. This means the reactant's 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules are converted by light energy captured by chlorophyll, implied by the arrow, into a sugar molecule and 6 oxygen molecules, the products. So, I will elaborate more on glucose and oxygen. Glucose, the primary energy source in cells, is made from 2 3-carbon Ja3P molecules. The photosynthesis reaction produces glucose, which provides energy for the plant. During photosynthesis, plants trap light energy within their leaves. Plants use energy of the sun to change water and carbon dioxide into a sugar called glucose. They break down glucose, and the chemical energy thus released is used by the plants for other cellular activities. Glucose is also used to prepare starch and cellulose, which is used in building cell walls. And for oxygen, oxygen is released as a byproduct of photosynthesis process. It is released into the air through the stomata. This oxygen is essential for supporting the respiration of animals and other organisms. Oxygen is evolved during photosynthetic electrons transport when the water is split by the oxygen evolving complex to provide photons and electrons to the chloroplastic electron chain, thereby generating ATP and NADPH, the energy source and reducing power for plants' metabolism. Let's watch the visual presentation for photosynthesis equation for more explanation and to better understand the process.
Photosynthesis takes place inside of plant cells, primarily palisade cells, which is what's shown here. It occurs inside of an organelle called a chloroplast. Carbon dioxide and water enter the cell, and then through photosynthesis, glucose and oxygen are generated. Some of the glucose is going to be used for the growth of the plant, and it's going to make things like, for example, cellulose. Some of that glucose is going to be used in the process of respiration, which is there to generate ATP, which is the energy currency of organisms. Some of that oxygen is going to go and be released to the atmosphere, and some of the oxygen is going to be used for respiration, but it doesn't use all of the oxygen that it produces, and so there is still a release of oxygen to the atmosphere, which is why we have an oxygen-rich atmosphere on planet Earth for animals to breathe. Now, this process of respiration is there to release energy, and so you might kind of get the impression that plants create energy. This is not true. They require sunlight for this process. Sunlight is the energy source that's used, and it basically just converts it from light energy into chemical energy. The word equation is pretty simple. Just plug in those chemicals that we've already mentioned. Carbon dioxide and water goes to glucose plus oxygen. Sometimes we might add on some of the extra details like sunlight is used and also chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is just a pigment that's responsible for the absorption of the light, and it's present inside of chloroplasts. Chemical equation, that's almost as simple as the word equation. The only thing is that you've got to know the chemical symbols for all of those things. And here it is right here. Go ahead, add on those extra details like sunlight and chlorophyll. And if you look at the whole thing a little bit more closely, you might notice that glucose, for example, on the right-hand side, this is C6H12O6, which means there are 6 carbon atoms present. Go over to the left-hand side and we've got carbon dioxide, which only has one carbon atom. So the implication here is that we've created 5 carbon atoms out of nowhere. Obviously that's not true, that's not possible. So it's a really good idea to go ahead and balance the equation. And the balanced chemical equation for photosynthesis looks like this. Let's look at a bit of exam help. Now then, you could get asked a question, something like, explain how plants convert carbon dioxide to carbohydrates. This is a 5-mark question. It's obviously quite in-depth, and it might be a little bit tricky to try and think, how do I convert what I know about photosynthesis into some sort of a wordy answer? Well, let's look at what you might say. First of all, plants use energy from sunlight. Whenever you're describing photosynthesis, there's a good chance you're going to get a mark for discussing sunlight. Next, say how that sunlight is captured, and it's by chlorophyll. Now then, the question does not mention that photosynthesis is occurring, so there's probably a mark available for proving that you know this is about photosynthesis. And then you might get a mark for mentioning the carbohydrate that's initially produced, which in this case is glucose. Now then, it requires carbon dioxide, but that's mentioned in the question, so it's unlikely you'd get a mark for that. But it doesn't mention how the carbon dioxide actually gets into the plant cells in the first place. Well, first it's got to enter the leaf, which is through those little holes called stomata, and then from the inside of the leaf it diffuses into the cells. So there's another possible mark. And last, whenever you're talking about photosynthesis, throw in the chemical equation or the word equation. There's a good chance you're going to get awarded a mark for that. So, out of all of that, there's 7 possible points you could say. You're certainly likely to get your 5 full marks for that.
Photosynthesis occurs in 2 main stages, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. So, in the first stage, the light energy is absorbed by chlorophyll, triggering the conversion of water into oxygen and high energy molecules. So in the second stage, it takes place in the stroma of chloroplast, where carbon dioxide is combined with the previously formed high energy molecules to produce glucose. So these stages represent the intricate process by which plants harness sunlight to create the energy-rich compounds necessary for their growth and sustenance. Light-dependent reaction, just as the name implies, light-dependent reactions require sunlight. In the light-dependent reactions, energy from sunlight is absorbed by chlorophyll and converted into stored chemical energy in the form of the electron carrier molecule NADPH and the energy currency molecule ATP. The light-dependent reactions take place in the thylakoid membranes in the granome within the chloroplast. So the difference between the light-dependent and light-independent reactions in photosynthesis lies in their dependency on light. The light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid membrane of chloroplast and rely on light energy to convert ADP and NADP into ATP and NADPH, using water and releasing oxygen as a byproduct. On the other hand, the light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle, occur in the stroma of chloroplast and do not directly require sunlight. In the first part of the light-dependent reactions, pigments, including chlorophylls in photosystem 2, absorbs light and energizing electrons. So this sparks an electron transport chain, creating a proton gradient as release energy pumps hydrogen ions into thylakoid lumen. Water photolysis adds more hydrogen ions, as these ions flow back into stroma through ATP synthase, adenosine triphosphate, or the ATP is synthesized. In the second step, electrons move to photosystem 1, get jazzed up by more light, and reduce NADP plus to NADPH via ferredox NADP plus reductase. Together, these steps showcase the conversion of light energy into chemical energy, yielding ATP and NADPH. So it is vital for subsequent light-independent reaction in photosynthesis. In summary, the light-dependent reactions capture light and convert it into a chemical energy, or ATP and NADPH, while the Calvin cycle uses this chemical energy to assimilate carbon dioxide into organic molecules, ultimately producing glucose, and other carbohydrates. So these processes work together to sustain the energy needs of plants and other photosynthetic organisms.
So, photosystem. Photosystem process that converts into light energy into chemical energy takes place in a multi-protein complex called a photosystem. So, there are two types of photosystems that are embedded in the thylakoid membrane, which are the photosystem 1 and the photosystem 2, or PS1 or PS2. Also, each photosystem plays a key role in capturing the energy from sunlight by exciting electrons. These energized electrons are transported by energy carrier molecules which power the light-independent reaction. Photosystem consists of a light harvesting complex and the reaction center. Pigments in light harvesting complex pass light energy to two special chlorophyll molecules in the reaction center. The light excites an electron from the chlorophyll, a pair which passes the primary electron acceptor. The excited electron must then be replaced in photosystem 2. The electron comes from the splitting of water which releases oxygen as a waste product in photosystem 1. The electron comes from the chloroplast electron transport chain.
Light-independent reaction or Kevin cycle are also called as the dark reaction. So natawag sila og dark reaction kay since dili sila nagdepend sa light. So in the light-independent reaction or Kevin cycle, the energized electrons from the light-dependent reaction provide the energy to form carbohydrates from carbon dioxide molecules. The light-independent reactions are sometimes called the Kevin cycle because of the cyclical nature of the process. Although the light-independent reaction do not use light as reactant, they require the products of light-dependent reactions to function. The light-independent molecules depend on the energy carrier molecules, the ATP and the NADPH. So as we all know, the ATP provides the energy and the NADPH provides the electron and the hydrogen needed to build the sugar. To drive the construction of new carbohydrate molecules, after the energy is transferred, the energy carrier molecules return to the light-dependent reaction to obtain more energized electrons. In addition, several enzymes of the light-independent reactions are activated by light. So next is the Calvin cycle process. So the first step is the carbon fixation. The rubisco or the ribulose biphosphate carboxylase oxygenase is the most abundant enzyme on Earth. It catalyzes the carboxylation of ribulose 1 and 5-biphosphate or the RUBP by carbon dioxide to produce an unstable 6-carbon compound. This 6-carbon compound is then readily converted into 2 molecules of 3-phosphoglyceric acid or the 3-PGA. So the second step is the reduction. An enzyme known as the phosphoglycerate kinase catalyzes the phosphorylation of the 3-PGA by ATP to produce the 1,3-biphosphoglyceric acid, 1,3-BP or the 1,3-BPJ, and ADP. Next, another enzyme, the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase, catalyze the reduction of 1,3-BPJ by NADPH to produce glyceraldehyde 3-biphosphate or the G3P and NADPH+. So the third step and the final step is the regeneration. So every turn of the Calvin cycle produce 2 molecules of G3P. Therefore, 6 turns of the cycle produce 12 molecules of G3P. 2 of these G3P molecules exit the cycle and are used to synthesize 1 molecule of glucose. Meanwhile, the other 10 molecules of G3P remain in the cycle and are used to regenerate the 6 RUBP or katong ribulose biphosphate. The regeneration of RUBP requires ATP. So the next slide is the video. So kining nga video is mo na siya ang pinaka last And kini nga video is mo ni siya ang mag-explain og tarong about the Calvin cycle process. So, please watch.
You're facing a giant bowl of energy-packed carbon crunchies. 1 spoonful, 2, 3. Soon, you're powered up by the energy surge that comes from your meal. But how did that energy get into your bowl? Energy exists in the form of sugars made by the plant your cereal came from, like wheat or corn. As you can see, carbon is the chemical backbone, and plants get their fix of it in the form of carbon dioxide, CO2, from the air that we all breathe. But how does a plant's energy factory, housed in the stroma of the chloroplast, turn a 1-carbon gas like CO2 into a 6-carbon solid like glucose? If you're thinking photosynthesis, you're right. But photosynthesis is divided into 2 steps. The first, which stores energy from the sun in the form of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. And the second, the Calvin cycle, that captures carbon and turns it into sugar. This second phase represents one of nature's most sustainable production lines. And so with that, welcome to the world's most minuscule factory. The starting materials? A mix of CO2 molecules from the air and pre-assembled molecules called ribulose bisphosphate, or RUBP, each containing 5 carbons. The initiator? An industrious enzyme named Rubisco that welds 1 carbon atom from a CO2 molecule with the RUBP chain to build an initial 6-carbon sequence. That rapidly splits into 2 shorter chains containing 3 carbons each and called phosphoglycerates, or PGAs for short. Enter ATP, and another chemical called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, or just NADPH. ATP, working like a lubricant, delivers energy, while NADPH affixes 1 hydrogen to each of the PGA chains, changing them into molecules called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphates, or G3Ps. Glucose needs 6 carbons to form, made from 2 molecules of G3P, which incidentally have 6 carbons between them. So sugar has just been manufactured, right? Not quite. The Calvin cycle works like a sustainable production line, meaning that those original RUBPs that kicked things off at the start need to be recreated by reusing materials within the cycle now. But each RUBP needs 5 carbons, and manufacturing glucose takes a whole 6. Something doesn't add up. The answer lies in one phenomenal fact. While we've been focusing on this single production line, 5 others have been happening at the same time. With 6 conveyor belts moving in unison, there isn't just 1 carbon that gets soldered to 1 RUBP chain, but 6 carbons soldered to 6 RUBPs. That creates 12 G3P chains instead of just 2, meaning that altogether 36 carbons exist, the precise number needed to manufacture sugar and rebuild those RUBPs. Of the 12 G3Ps pooled together, 2 are siphoned off to form that energy-rich 6-carbon glucose chain, the one fueling you via your breakfast. Success! But back on the manufacturing line, the byproducts of this sugar production are swiftly assembled to recreate those 6 RUBPs. That requires 30 carbons, the exact number contained by the remaining 10 G3Ps. Now, a molecular mix and match occurs. 2 of the G3Ps are welded together, forming a 6-carbon sequence. By adding a third G3P, a 9-carbon chain is built. The first RUBP, made up of 5 carbons, is cast from this, leaving 4 carbons behind. But there's no wastage here. Those are soldered to a 4th G3P molecule, making a 7-carbon chain. Added to a 5th G3P molecule, a 10-carbon chain is created, enough now to craft 2 more RUBPs. With 3 full RUBPs recreated from 5 of the 10 G3Ps, simply duplicating this process will renew the 6 RUBP chains needed to restart the cycle again. So the Calvin cycle generates the precise number of elements and processes required to keep this biochemical production line turning endlessly. And it's just one of the hundreds of cycles present in nature. Why so many? Because if biological production processes were linear, they wouldn't be nearly as efficient or successful at using energy to manufacture the materials that nature relies upon, like sugar. Cycles create vital feedback loops that repeatedly reuse and rebuild ingredients, crafting as much as possible out of the planet's available resources. Such as that sugar, built using raw sunlight and carbon, converted in plant factories to become the energy that powers you and keeps the cycles revolving in your own life.